Wouldn't it be great if we could build an internationalist movement from this tragedy of George Floyd? Because this is an international theme that not only are black and brown people being exploited and oppressed in Western countries, but it's our Western imperialist endeavors and adventures are oppressing and killing and destroying their countries. So it would be really great if we connected the dots and realized that this is just not a local thing, it's not a national thing, this is an international movement. It should be internationalist. We should be internationalists because we're all connected. I read something from Ajama Baraka this morning and it made me smile. He showed a picture of the wall that is around the White House that they put around there when Trump has to go to his bunker and get the military to protect him. He has a wall around it. That's not quite the wall that he was thinking of when he talked about a wall, and it's to keep the people away from him. That's exactly the sort of thing that you want these oligarchs and these politicians and capitalist class. You want them to be afraid of us. That's very, very important. If they're not afraid of us, and they haven't been afraid of us, then we have no bargaining power. This kleptocracy, the oligarchy, is always going to use state power, the militarized police, the Western imperialist military. They're always going to use that to oppress the masses if we don't fall in line. And that's what they're hoping that we'll do, fall in line. And that's why they're offering these various crumbs and these concessions, like the Minneapolis police are going to be disbanded. That's good news, but these are sort of things that it's not really addressing the problem, which starts at the top. It started at the colonization of the United States, and it takes people to connect the dots and realize that this is something that is an international issue. And at this juncture, I'd like to suggest people join the Black Agenda Report. I can never do justice to talking about this, and it's much better coming from the people that are being oppressed. And the blackagendareport.com is definitely something that everybody should subscribe to, because their analysis of what is going on is often very prescient, and it's usually right on the mark, and they don't hold back. They don't hold back with criticizing the black misleadership class in the United States. They don't hold back with criticizing whomever. There are no favorites with the Black Agenda Report. And I try to subscribe to alternative news sources where they don't actually have, they're not trying to be popular, they're trying to be truthful, and they're trying to present the facts as they are, and they never ever abandon the anti-imperialist, anti-war position. I don't think any group, any news source can be a real news source if they're not anti-imperialist and anti-war. It's essential for anybody on the left to be anti-imperialist, anti-war. So just a few things that I saw today that I wanted to just touch on, and then I just want to talk a little bit about what I feel and think about this, what appears to be now an internationalist movement. And when I said a few days ago, chin up, don't worry, something good might come from this, I was hopeful on one hand, but also I have this sinking feeling. But I was hopeful that something good would come from all of this final straw, really, with the George Floyd murder by state police. And then it broadened out, of course, to this pandemic, which has, there's been tens of millions in the United States are now unemployed. And when you have people that are unemployed and they don't know what the future is going to hold for them, then they're probably going to join in too on this movement, because they start to connect the dots and see that how the establishment is treating black lives is also coming for them. It's unfortunate that it takes something like that, a catalyst like that, or a pandemic, or something like the murder of George Floyd, to get white people to wake up. But sometimes it takes a number of factors and a number of events to get people to wake up. And I think this might actually be, and this would be really great, this may actually be a turning point in the United States. This pandemic, as awful as it is, has set the stage to allow people to see how both sides of the aisle, the duopoly, which is really just one big party with the extreme right and the right, you can look at who they're putting forward as candidates, two Republicans basically. So, and they're both it's just one big war party. So people are sort of, I think, starting to see, and if those that aren't starting to see need to be presented with this in a context. If people don't see this contextually and that it's not just an event, the George Floyd murder is not just some sort of firstly, they need to see it that it's not an aberration, which I think people are seeing it, that it's not just some awful thing that's happened. They're seeing it that it's an intentional thing that goes unaddressed over and over and over again, and it's part of a dreadful structurally racist system. And so I think a lot of people are seeing that, but they need to see in a much broader sense what we're doing overseas to black and brown people overseas, that we're murdering them, torturing them, destroying their countries. We're imperializing them for hegemony in that region because they wouldn't submit to Western imperialism, Western capitalism. And then we're basically bringing in corporations and destroying any sort of, if there's any kind of socialist-like structures there, we're intentionally trying to destroy it. And that's the whole aim of it in the end. Capitalism is inextricably linked with imperialism, and in end-stage capitalism, it's inextricably linked to fascism. And that's where we're heading to. And I've talked about that in some other videos. There's basically a neo-fascist in office right now. And he would, if he gets in again, he will intend to broaden that and make it just full-on fascist, a full-on fascist state. So the people need to have a strategy. The people internationally need to have a strategy. They need to see things in a much broader context, that the state is coming for them, just like it's been dominating and exploiting and oppressing black and brown people all over the world. The international community needs to band together and basically end this empire, U.S. empire. And the first thing that needs to happen is to recognize it as an empire, recognize what it's doing and how it is basically manipulating all governments, Western governments who are happy to go along with it because they get the profits from that, and manipulating all governments that are trying to push against that, like Venezuela and Bolivia. And, China. China doesn't want to be under the thumb of the U.S., and even though it's in part sort of, it's got capitalist aims as well as it also has a command economy, but it is in the crosshairs of the U.S. empire. But we all need to start putting together that this is that we have rulers on this planet. We don't have governments, we have rulers, and they're all banding together to rule everybody and monopolize. Look at how corporations are all glomming together and becoming bigger and bigger and bigger. They're subsuming other corporations, and the large corporations are becoming bigger and bigger and bigger. There's less choice, there's less opportunity to push back on them. Look at Bezos and Amazon. He's going to be a trillionaire in the next few years. So this will only continue that way in end-stage capitalism, and that's why we all need to put out independent alternative media that is addressing imperialism and the endless wars that are oppressing black and brown people all over the planet. And we need to look at capitalism and what an inherently exploitative thing it is, and we need to reject it. There's no good outcome, there's no happy face that we can put on capitalism. It is inherently exploitative, and look where it's brought us, to the edge of extinction. And we're all participants in it because we're all consumers. And that's why I often say when I talk about veganism, that all this awful stuff that we're doing to non-human animals wouldn't exist if we were all vegan, because we're actually creating demand for those animal products. And those animals are sentient animals. And I wish that people would also expand that understanding of what we're doing to black and brown people overseas, this imperialization and colonization and oppression of black and brown people, and see what we're doing to non-human animals. That is the largest group on the planet, the most vulnerable group on the planet, the most invisible group on the planet. We are dominating, exploiting, killing, and torturing and maiming and drowning and everything else for completely trivial reasons and mostly palate pleasure. We don't need those animal products at all to survive. So I wish that people would also acknowledge and sort of understand and connect the dots even further, that what we do to non-human animals is what we eventually do to humans. Because you cannot have one form of exploitation like that, one form of discrimination, which is speciesism, that will remain and have borders and won't affect other things that we do on the planet. What we're doing to them, we eventually do to other people, to human animals. So that's why it's very important for people on the left in particular to recognize speciesism as just one face of the many ignorances, racism, sexism, heterosexism, etc. And recognize that and know that where we have one form of discrimination, speciesism, we will have all forms. So I want to just talk about a few things that happened. Firstly, it was great to see the new Black Panthers out on the streets. You know that I'm not really for guns or anything, but I don't have a problem with the new Panthers, the new Black Panthers, open carrying. And I think that if white neo-fascists can go around open carrying and they don't get hauled up, in fact they get protected by the state, then the Black Panthers, who have open carried before and ended up either being killed or put in prison for 30 or 40 years and died in prison, some, you know, they need to be able to, if they wish to, they should be able to. The new Black Panthers should be allowed to open carry if it's a law that in the state. So the new Black Panthers, they were in a march, and I don't know what the woman was called who was in there, but she gave a nice speech. That was good to see, and watch the pushback on that, because the state is so afraid of black power. And you don't have to be carrying weapons, of course, to have power. The state, as you can see by how they crush repeatedly black people and keep them poor and keep them impoverished and unwell, keep them sick. There's a reason for that. There's a white supremacist reason for that, and it's a fear of other. And wanting, this ridiculous fear of white replacement theory being replaced. Yes, white people are going to be replaced, and that's a good thing. It's not replaced anyway. White people, basically, hopefully, we're going to end up a big melting pot, like that song went. What we need is a great big melting pot, exactly, where people are just light tanned or brown or whatever, different. It's all, you look at people and you can't even tell what sort of background they have. That's what we need, basically. This ridiculous white supremacist, white nationalist thing is, look at the mess that this whole white supremacist imperialist thing has caused in the world today. I probably won't be around for it, but I think that there will be a big melting pot, and you won't be able to tell what background anybody has anymore, and I look forward to that. The Pennsylvania protests, they were amazing. Philadelphia had a massive protest, and I feel like there's more to, of course there is more to this than the George Floyd murder by the police. It's a lot bigger than that, and there's a lot of discontent. And that's why Trump has a big wall around the White House, because as much as he's probably going to do something like come out in a few days and talk about unity instead of talking about calling the military, he's going to be calling for unity, because he's going to try and do everything, as is the rest of the establishment, whether through trying to co-opt the movement or whatever. They're going to try everything they can to get people to shut the F up and go home and go back to normal. That's what the establishment wants. And I'm talking about the U.S. Democratic Party, the Republicans. I'm talking about anywhere in the world where there are massive protests. They want them to go home, and they'll do anything they can, whether it's pretending to getting the cops to take a knee or getting the National Guard to give love and peace speeches and hug protesters. All the propaganda that's been put out there, and check out the Grey Zone about the whole propaganda thing, this taking the knee and all of that cops are doing, is just an attempt to get people to calm down, to make them feel better, and to get them to go home, to get them to shut the F up, stop protesting, and go home. And they'll do it by any means necessary. If the threat of the military being brought in, or all those other measures that they were thinking of employing to get people to stop and go home and stop protesting, if that didn't work, which it appears it isn't working, then they'll try and do what they can to pretend like everybody's on side, and call for unity and all that, or sort of make concessions, which is what they're doing. And you probably noticed that the Michigan sheriff, whose name is Sheriff Christopher R. Swanson of Genesee County, he walked with demonstrators and said, let's turn this protest into a parade. How patronizing is that? Anyway, he's actually a real unpleasant sheriff who really, really sticks the boot in with black people. This is just a big manipulation on his part. And if you check out Alec Karakatsanis, he's at Equality Alec on Twitter, he said, this is the sheriff who, quote, locks Flint children from visiting their parents in his jail, requires families to pay multi-billion-dollar company to talk to their loved ones, takes a cut of the profits, and cages people who can't pay cash. So, he's conducting a propaganda war, basically, this sheriff. And that's what they want. They want people to take happy snaps with them, hugging them, and all of this. These are the police. So let's not fall for that, shall we? Because this is all an attempt to win the propaganda war and make people believe that everything's going to be okay. And they'll do some trimming around the edges, and then it'll all go back to how it is. It'll be interesting to see how the Minneapolis police being disbanded, how that pans out, and what happens after that. Barack Obama's, doing all this. He's also trying to get people to shut up and go home by pretending like he's all for black people and that, this is what we need to do. This is a man who dropped 100,000 bombs on black and brown people in the Middle East, and he even ran out of bombs at one point. That's how many bombs they were dropping. So this is a man who was funded by the health insurance industry in his campaign, and who passed on Medicare for all. He's got so many things wrong with him. I've listed it in another video, and I suggest you check out the blackagendareport.com to find out more about the scam that is the brand that is Barack Obama, who really was just the black face of white supremacist imperialism. And there were massive protests in Tel Aviv, in Israel, over the possible annexation of the West Bank. Massive protests. So check that out. And also check out the Empire Files, although they're on hold at the moment because Abby Martin has just had a baby. So, but they've done a program that they're going to release when the Black Lives Matter protests start to subside, because they don't want to detract from that. But they're going to release something about Afghanistan, which will be very interesting. The Empire Files, such a great program, and I talk about it often, probably ad nauseum for some people, but it's so important, such an important independent journalist site, and please support them. They are viewer supported, and so you can go to their Patreon account. Just check out the Empire Files with Abby Martin Patreon, and you'll be able to support them there. It's very, very important that we all support them. Any real independent news sites like that, like the Mint Press News and the Grey Zone, Media Roots Radio, that kind of thing. So anyway, it was very heartening to see how the great marches all over the US and even here in Australia, and I hope that Australians recognise that Black Lives Matter in Australia, and that there are many Indigenous First Peoples deaths in custody. There's been about 400 in the last few decades of black people in Australia dying in custody, and it kind of makes me sad that there are so many people that do these, tip their hat to this issue but really don't pay any attention to it. There are so many First Peoples suicides happening now are really, really young people. Like I'm talking as young as 9 years old, 7 years old. 7 years old suicides or attempted suicides of young Indigenous people in Australia. That is appalling. And if you want to find out more, follow Jerry Georgopoulos on Facebook. And he's really got his finger on the pulse with that. He's a great guy, and I interviewed him a couple of years ago. Unfortunately, the audio wasn't very good from his side, but we did a really good interview. It was about an hour and a half, and he's a wonderful man. Anyway, so I'm just hoping that there's some kind of the people don't just sort of, if they get a few concessions from their government, or the government throws them a few crumbs that they think, oh, well, it's all better now, let's go back to normal. Because this normal is killing people. This normal is a disgrace. It's not normal. And anybody who thinks it's normal obviously isn't struggling with costs of things, costs of health care, isn't struggling with having their relatives murdered for doing nothing but, putting their hands on a steering wheel, or just living and breathing. It's not normal if we're going around murdering and torturing people all over the world and destroying their countries. There's nothing normal about that. This is an abomination. Where we've been heading is an abomination. It's not normal to be baking pigs to death by the millions, baking them alive by the millions because they're excess, when we don't need animal products at all to survive. They shouldn't even be there, and they're only there because you and I are not vegan. Well, I'm vegan, but they're only there because most of society is not vegan and views them as resources. There's no non-abusive way to use animals, so we need to just stop it. And even if there were, it would still be wrong. They're sentient animals. And I know people go, oh no, here she goes again talking about veganism. It really isn't relevant. People will say, it's not relevant. How is that relevant? And we can get to that later. We can get to it later. It's a personal choice. Look at what Extinction Rebellion says. It's a personal choice. No, it's not. It's a destructive force. It is an abomination what we're doing to non-human animals. And in turn, we're destroying the planet. Climate crisis is a direct result of the massive animal agriculture, pollution, and land clearing, and including the Amazon rainforest. It's all a massive contributor, animal agriculture, our eating of meat, dairy, eggs, etc. So yes, it is relevant, and to those people who keep trying to pretend that it's not relevant, you're being disingenuous, because you know at this point it is. Let's stop being lazy and stop making excuses and do what's right. And it's actually at the core of a lot of this violence, what we're doing to non-human animals. We need to do what's right and do it now. No more excuses, no more. I'm starting with meat, and then I'm gonna eventually get to dairy, and then eventually I'll get to eggs, and then maybe I'll stop wearing leather. And in about 30 years' time, when we're actually on the edge, literally going extinct, then maybe I'll stop. I'll have to stop because there won't be any animal agriculture. It's going to stop soon because it's absolutely unsustainable, as well as being incredibly violent. Let go or be dragged, everybody. Let go or be dragged. Let's stop using animals, because all of this is related. All of this that's going on right now, it's related.
You see police surround this car. Inside, Tanika Tate and her cousin Mia Wright and others. Now, the family claims officers stormed their vehicle, breaking windows and pulling them out of the vehicle for no reason at all. But what bothers them most is that, what bothers them more than anything is that when Mia was yanked from the car, they say one cop held her down by putting his knee on her back and neck.
They approached my car so forcefully where they just start bamming and hitting at my car. Then they bust out 3 windows of mine, and then they actually tore off my door handle, the passenger side door handle, and they literally drug my little cousin Mia out onto the ground.
I felt like an animal. They pulled me by my hair, dragged me out the vehicle, had my face down on the concrete. Officer had his knee in my neck. I just felt like an animal. I felt like I wasn't nothing. Like I wasn't not even a human being at that moment.
If you've seen Mia Wright, she and her family were dragged out of a car by the police. They were smashing, this is after George Floyd, smashing the car windows. This is in Illinois, in Chicago, in Cook County, I think. If you have a look at the video, they're smashing the police. There's about 6 or 7 of them, all in, smashing with their batons the car. Then they drag them out. They drag out Mia Wright by her hair and throw her to the ground. Then they put her knee on her neck, and she said, "I just felt like I was going to be killed like George Floyd. She thought she was going to be murdered in front of everybody." Fortunately, there was somebody filming this. They're going to sue the county, I think, which is a great thing. I hope they get lots and lots of money for it. It's disgusting. This is after George Floyd. The knee on the neck, a carotid compression, an intentional attempt to asphyxiate somebody. That's what they do in Israel, the Palestinians, in apartheid Israel. These are the methods employed by the police, who are trained by the Israeli occupational forces there, the IDF. This is after George Floyd. It's incredible. So she actually said, "I felt like an animal. I was dragged out of the car. I felt like an animal." That's what she said. And you'll often hear that. She said, "I felt less than an animal." Like, people wouldn't do that to animals. Well, yes, they do that to animals in industrialized farming, in free range, and all in free range in quotes, which is industrialized. They do that to animals much, much worse than that. Like baking pigs alive, and then when they're screaming for hours and hours because they're being baked alive, then people then go in and shoot the ones that aren't dead, that are in dreadful agony. And much worse than that. They boil pigs alive, as a matter of fact, by the way, in slaughterhouses because they're not stunned correctly. Stunned correctly, whatever that means. They boil chickens alive because the fast pace of the lines. These are sentient animals. So anyway, back to Mia Wright. So she said, I felt like an animal. In fact, they wouldn't treat animals that way, and I've just explained, yes, they do. But so you hear it over and over again. People, oftentimes, black people will say, "I felt like an animal. They treated me like an animal." I want to see the day when we don't use that comparison because we're vegan. I don't want us to be treating animals like an animal. I want to see us not using animals at all, period. Because it's not how we use them that is ever an issue for anybody who's really vegan. It's that we use them at all. So I want to see a day where people aren't even saying that anymore. I felt like I was being treated like an animal. You see what I'm saying? And that is where it's all connected. When people say, "I felt like an animal," that's exactly how those police officers saw them. Less than an animal, even. Less than an animal, because they probably wouldn't treat animals like that. They wouldn't treat a dog like that or a cat like that, or maybe they would. But it shows that the connections between how we treat non-human animals, how we use them, which is more the issue, that we think we can use them at all, that we see them as property. That's how the police and white nationalists see, white supremacists see black people and brown people. And that's why we go around the world imperializing and destroying black and brown people's countries. Because we think we can. Because we are white supremacist imperialists. And we also think we can go around dominating and exploiting and destroying areas where non-human animals live, or just capturing them and exploiting them, killing and using them for food, clothing, entertainment, and other reasons. We think we can do all that because they're other. So while we continue to otherize people, otherize humans and non-humans, while we continue to do that, and I've done that, we're raised in situations where we're in a privileged position. We're raised in situations where we all are taught that it's okay to use other animals because they're other, because they're different, because we think they're lesser because they're other. It's all connected. All faces of the same ignorance, all cause violence, and where you have one, you'll have all forms. Anyway, I've digressed in some ways, but I haven't really, because I can't stop thinking about what we're doing to non-human animals, and why should I? Because they're sentient animals, and as a vegan, I can't ever see what's happening, what we're doing to, say, black and brown people overseas and with our imperialist adventures. I can't see it as separate to what we've been doing for, millions of years, basically, to the occupants of this planet, whose only crime is that they are another species. I can't see it as separate. And we should try not to see it as separate, because it's not. How can it be separate? We're all on the same planet. We know they're sentient. We can pretend they're not, but they are. When it's convenient, we acknowledge it, and we fetishize certain animals. So we've got to connect the dots, not only between what's happening to black lives in the United States and throughout the world via domestic structural white supremacist policies that are intended to keep people. They're intentional. They're not accidental. And then we need to connect that to the greater picture of imperialist wars, the capitalist imperialist wars with the capitalist armies. That's what they're there for. As like Smedley Butler said, he felt like a gangster, basically. He felt like he was a gangster. He felt like he was a head kicker for the oligarchy. General Smedley Butler. War is a racket, he said. War is a racket. So we need to connect those two things, and we need to connect the even bigger picture of the literally trillions of animals that we are killing, torturing, and maiming every year for trivial reasons of mostly palate pleasure. And because we can. I've talked about this before. Because we can. We do these things because we can. It's a human supremacist thing in relation to animals, non-human animals. It's a white supremacist thing in relation to black and brown people. Supremacy. It's a bullying tactic. It's bullying. We're all bullies if we don't do something to stop this. And if you're not vegan, please think about it. Please think about all those millions of pigs being baked to death. I heard they put steam in through the vents and they bake them to death because they're excess during this COVID pandemic and they can't get them to the slaughterhouses. So they bake them alive. Can you imagine that? Just imagine millions of people standing in a big warehouse, and they're baked alive, steam coming through the vents. And they're screaming, and it goes on for hours. And then somebody comes in and shoots people who are sort of half-baked alive, the ones that didn't die. That's just a little glimpse into the abomination that we've made for these non-human animals who are sentient, who love life just like we do and do not want to die. Just think about that. And it's really our fault if we're not vegan. All of that suffering, it's our fault if we're not vegan. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. My name's Trish Roberts. You're watching Faint Signals from Vega. Please check out my vegan resource and please support whatever you can. The solidarity is essential during this time because this could really tip over into something really very good for the people on the planet and very bad for the oligarchy, the 1% that has been having their own way for a long time and they think they've got it all sewn up. This could be very bad for them, and that's a good thing. They need to be afraid. Thanks for watching. Till next time. Bye for now.